A few thousand people waved royal blue Alberta flags Saturday in front of the legislature, declaring their province would be better off without Canada.
Some of them are angry. I'm just hurt with how Ottawa's treated us.
I've never seen engagement like this before with people on the ground.
Alberta had been decimated by 10 years of Justin Trudeau.
The CTV News Decision Desk declaring a Liberal win.
That was the final straw for a number of Albertans, including myself.
We're being held back by Liberal politics.
A referendum on whether Alberta should separate from Canada is one step closer today.
A free and independent Alberta would be far more successful and far more wealthy and far more prosperous.
It would shrink Alberta's economy. There are no compelling reasons for Alberta to separate from Canada. The word treasonous has been used, and I don't think it's a wrong word.
Well, I'm here with Alberta Premier Danielle Smith.
I hope that Prime Minister Carney is watching that as well. I've told him to take it seriously.
Will Alberta, Canada's oil-rich and conservative province, vote to leave the country? A few years ago, that would have sounded like an insane question. But today, it's a very real one. Polls now show that almost half of Albertans believe their province would be better off as its own country, and this comes after 10 years of Liberal government, pushing policies that some say have hurt the province and undermine its economy. Much of the legacy media, these same legacy media that claim that Hillary Clinton had a 98% chance of winning the 2016 US presidential election, and that said that the United Kingdom would never leave the European Union, are currently dismissing Alberta independence as a fringe thing that will never happen. And while Alberta independence may have once been a fringe issue, it no longer is. My name is Cantin-Nantel. I'm a journalist, and I've been involved in Canadian politics for the last decade. And while I am based in Ottawa, I have lived in Alberta, and I was born in Quebec, another Canadian province with its own long history of separatism. And recently, I went to Alberta to spend a week there to see what was really happening. I spoke to the people leading the movement, the people supporting the movement, and the people opposing the movement to get a full picture view of what is happening out in Western Canada. And what I found is this: the Alberta independence movement is real, and it is growing. This is not just some anger or frustration. This is real momentum. And what I'm about to show you in this documentary will completely change how you view the future of Canada.
Journalism and commentary 1 year anniversary.
I don't believe journalism being funded by the government is the solution.
You have to rebuild your foundation.
You have to retell the story.
Market conservative
Other news that actually matters.
I hence wanted to ask. I think they should answer their questions, especially if they're politically charged with.
Part 1. When the unthinkable becomes reality. My trip to Alberta begins in Calgary, and more precisely on the side of 16th Avenue North, also known as the Trans-Canada Highway. There, I met a group of men running an Alberta independence petition signing location, where Alberta citizens can go sign a petition to trigger an independence referendum. It is one of 250 such locations across the province.
Do you want to tell me what you're doing out here on the side of this road in Calgary?
Yes, for the past 3 months now, many Calgarians, which is where we are, and Albertans across Alberta are collecting signatures from the public on behalf of Elections Alberta, and it's for the Stay Free Alberta movement, which is to get Ottawa to pay attention to what's going on with the politics of our country. We feel, that we're being held back by Liberal politics.
In Alberta, residents can use something called the Citizen Initiative process to trigger a vote on constitutional questions, including separation from Canada. The ability for citizens to trigger referendums is actually quite new. It was introduced in 2021 by then United Conservative Party Premier Jason Kenney, but was later expanded by current Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. Danielle Smith has made a series of changes to the legislation that people say have made it easier for separatists to have this campaign. Among other things, she dramatically lowered the number of signatures needed to trigger a referendum. She extended the time that people have to collect those signatures, and she also limited the ability of courts to review the constitutionality or legality of proposed citizen initiative referendum questions early in the process. That said, the organizers are not out of the woods when it comes to legal obstacles, but we'll get more into that later in the documentary.
You can drive down any country road almost and see somebody that's set up, and people are pulling in and signing, and it's been almost way more amazing than I thought it might be. As I talk to people, I can see that they desperate. Some of them are angry.
Yeah.
I'm not angry. I'm just hurt with how Ottawa's treated us.
To trigger an independence referendum, organizers need 10% of the number of people who voted in the last Alberta provincial election, which is approximately 177,000 signatures. And on March 31st, 2026, organizers announced that they had reached that number of signatures in a campaign that they have until May the 2nd to get signatures, which makes it almost certain that there will be an independence referendum in Alberta this fall.
Part 2, the case for leaving Canada.
Alberta independence is gaining momentum primarily through an economic message. Now, this is what sets this movement apart from Canada's other major separatist movement, the one in Quebec, Canada's only majority francophone province. Quebec separatism was more cultural and nationalist. Its proponents argue that Quebecers form a distinct nation with a unique culture, language, history, and values, and should therefore exercise their right to self-determination. It was economic frustrations with the status quo that drew Trudy Corbett, a retired periodontist who moved to Alberta a few years ago to retire after practicing dentistry across the country, to support Alberta independence, a term she told me she prefers to the term separation.
We're overtaxed in this country, ridiculous amount of taxes that we pay. We have a federal government that currently just projected an $80 billion deficit. They're overspending. We have a huge amount of debt in this country, 1.3 trillion almost. That's ridiculous. There's no reason for that.
In addition to speaking with Corbett, I also spoke with Jeffrey Rath. He is a lawyer and co-founder of the Alberta Prosperity Project, which advocates for Alberta independence. Rath has become an outspoken spokesperson for the movement and is often the one making the rounds in the media to speak for the cause. In my conversations with Rath, Corbett, and other supporters of Alberta independence, I identified the three biggest frustrations that Albertans have with the status quo in Canada. The first frustration is a sentiment that the federal Liberals have undermined and even attacked Alberta's oil and gas sector.
Alberta had been decimated by 10 years of Justin Trudeau, the destruction of our economy, the landlocking and the freezing of oil and gas development in Alberta, the destruction of the provincial economy.
Alberta's oil sands are the fourth largest oil reserve in the world. But since the federal Liberals took office in 2015, critics say they have put forward several policies that have hurt that industry. These policies include Bill C-69, a regulatory bill dubbed the No More Pipelines Bill, Bill C-48, which banned large oil tankers from the waters off the northern coast of British Columbia, the adoption of the United Nations Declaration on Indigenous Peoples, or UNDRIP, which critics say could create major uncertainty, a federal oil and gas emissions cap to limit total emissions, a federal carbon tax, clean fuel regulations, and a so-called just transition to net zero. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau even once said that Alberta's oil sands needed to be phased out.
We can't shut down the oil sands tomorrow. We need to phase them out.
That, combined with other factors, like the 2014 to 2016 global oil price collapse and the COVID-19 pandemic, have caused significant damage to the industry. In total, Canada saw the cancellation of $670 billion worth of natural resources projects since 2015, the year the Liberals took office. And there have been considerable job losses in the sector.
They've created huge number of policies that are ridiculous, in my opinion. I mean, look at Alberta. We can't get oil to market with the tanker ban. We can't get it to the West Coast. We can't even in this country build a pipeline from coast to coast because they're letting individual provinces make decisions as opposed to something that should be federally regulated under our Constitution. Being restricted, they're trying to decarbonize oil. I mean, that's adding a cost to every barrel of oil that's produced in Alberta. So we become less competitive, more expensive. So it's really a policy thing for me, is they just keep putting up roadblocks, and I don't see an end to it.
The second frustration lies with Canada's equalization formula. Equalization is a federal transfer program that redistributes money to provinces that cannot raise as much tax revenue as others. According to the Alberta Prosperity Project, which supports independence, Alberta contributes approximately $68 to $75 billion annually to the Government of Canada, but only receives between $22 to $26 billion back in federal transfers, resulting in a net over-contribution of roughly $44 billion to $47 billion per year. Alberta receives zero equalization payments, while Quebec, whose politicians are often loud critics and opponents of Alberta's oil and gas sector, receives over $13 billion in equalization. The third frustration is with political representation. In all of the elections over the past decades, Western Canada has overwhelmingly voted Conservative, but Eastern Canada has voted Liberal, and therefore Canada has had 4 Liberal election wins in a row, including in races where the Liberals didn't win the popular vote. Combined, Alberta and Saskatchewan have 51 seats in Canada's lower house, the House of Commons, while Ontario and Quebec have a combined 200 seats. Now, Alberta and Saskatchewan do have smaller populations than Ontario and Quebec, so many will say, well, it's expected that they will have lower seat counts. That said, that misrepresentation is also in the Senate, a upper house that in many countries serves as a counterbalance to the lower house by reflecting regional representation. Combined, Alberta and Saskatchewan have 12 senators for a combined population of approximately 6.2 million people, while Atlantic Canada, which has a combined population of 2.4 million people, has 30 senators. So Alberta and Saskatchewan have less than half of the senators, then a part of the country that has less than half of their population.
We think that Canada separated from Alberta. Like, we're not separating from Canada. Canada has already separated from Alberta.
I don't think in my lifetime we're going to see another Conservative federal government, because we had 10 years of Trudeau, which in my opinion, basically he decimated this country.
Alberta independence is being floated as the best solution to these problems. Its supporters argue that it would free the oil and gas industry from regulation and red tape, and that Alberta would no longer be in a system where it is politically underrepresented. The Alberta Prosperity Project claims that independence would allow Alberta to keep the roughly $44 to $47 billion that it alleges Alberta currently gives away to Ottawa, and they say that this money could be used to fund major projects, create an Alberta pension plan, have its own employment insurance program, healthcare, as well as benefits like lower university tuition. The Prosperity Project also claims that independence would result in major tax cuts for Albertans, including the elimination of federal income tax, lower corporate tax rates, and after 5 years, 0% personal income tax, something that is seen in some oil-rich countries around the world.
A free and independent Alberta would be far more successful and far more wealthy and far more prosperous than an Alberta that would remain in Canada. We can afford in year 1 of independence to completely eliminate federal income tax. We can double CPP and double OAS payments to our senior citizens, stand up an Alberta armed forces, 3% of GDP going to defense, replace all the so-called federal questionable services, border patrol, immigration. We say immigration and deportation. So the benefits to Albertans are going to be through the roof, right? So imagine just eliminating, and we're not talking about eliminating all taxes. We're not living in some fantasy world, right?
Mm-hmm.
There has, you have to have a government, and you have to have government services and the rest of it. Initially, whatever level, the level of provincial income tax that exists would exist, and existing provincial revenues would remain provincial revenues. But just getting rid of federal income tax is about 25% for every adult, working adult in Alberta.
Part 3, the history of Alberta independence. It is important to note that this movement, while gaining traction, is actually not new and has been around for over half a century. In fact, it first picked up considerable momentum under another Trudeau, Pierre Trudeau, who is Justin Trudeau's father. Pierre Trudeau sought to reshape Alberta's economy with a national energy program that critics say caused considerable harm to Alberta oil and gas. That is what longtime Alberta independence supporter Cory Morgan, who founded the Alberta Independence Party and who is now a columnist and commentator with the Western Standard, an online publication, explained to me.
In the late 70s, early 80s, the National Energy Program, Pierre Trudeau, the crack split wide open with the West and the East, particularly in Alberta, and parties were formed in an actual movement for full-on secession rather than just discontent. So the Western Canada concept was formed. Trudeau Sr., it was just an outright grab on Alberta's resources. That National Energy Program, for those who aren't familiar with it, there were the price spikes from yet another Middle Eastern war. Things seem to sound so familiar as they happen again and again. Suddenly Alberta's oil that Central Canada didn't want because they used to get it from Venezuela and Saudi Arabia, and they still do, suddenly it became Canada's oil. And they put a levy on Alberta oil and gas products. They forced Alberta to sell oil at a discounted rate to Central Canada. And they really believed that the oil companies wouldn't leave. That was one of the mistakes that a lot of people seem to make. And the oil companies did leave. They picked up, they left. Buildings were left down here half built in downtown Calgary. The economy stalled overnight. People lost their homes. The 80s were terrible with double-digit interest rates, so it really harmed a lot of people who were leveraged. And that wasn't forgotten. It was a terrible policy decision. It completely disrespected the rights of anybody in Alberta or the West. And the indifference to the damage it caused was something out of Pierre Trudeau that really inflamed people.
Alberta's unemployment rate, bankruptcy rate, and revenue losses were also affected by the early 1980s recession, which hit all of Canada and the United States, as well as by a crash in oil prices. Pierre Trudeau resigned in 1984, and later that year, the Liberals were voted out of office and replaced by a Conservative government led by Brian Mulroney. And in the years that followed, a new political party emerged in the West called the Reform Party. This party, led by Preston Manning, rose to prominence as a conservative Western-based but non-separatist federal party that sought to represent the West's interests in Parliament. Manning's message was quite different from the one of independent supporters. He said the West wants in, and he believed that Ottawa could give the West greater participation in Confederation. But in the year 2000, in an effort to unite Conservatives across Canada, the Reform Party became the Canadian Alliance, which later merged with the Progressive Conservative Party to create the modern-day Conservative Party of Canada. But that meant that there was no more Western-centric party in Parliament. And in 2001, a new Alberta Independence Party was founded by Morgan. And since then, there have been several other independence parties that have been formed, but arguably many of them never really got anywhere, and some of them were plagued by infighting. But October 2019 will come to be a turning point for the Alberta independence movement. That is because that's when Justin Trudeau was elected for a second term, despite not winning the popular vote, because he had strong support out in the East and very little support out in the West, where Alberta and Saskatchewan are. The separatist movement gained momentum under the banner of Wexit. So like his father, Pierre Trudeau, Justin Trudeau was turning out to be someone driving momentum for Alberta's separatists.
The next incarnation of him come out with Justin, who is very different from his father. They're very different Trudeaus. Pierre Trudeau was a little more cerebral. Justin, I don't know what the heck Justin is still to this day. He's not a deep thinker. He was more focused on the woke, more focused on... Pierre Trudeau came after Alberta's economy for financial reasons and maybe a socialist ideology. Justin Trudeau came after Alberta's economy on an environmentalist ideology, an obsession almost.
The momentum of the independence movement was, however, curbed by the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as by the rise of Pierre Poilievre being a conservative MP who grew up in Calgary and who was running on a populist conservative message that many in Alberta resonated, and began to see Poilievre as the man who would put Alberta out of the misery that it had been put under during the time of Justin Trudeau. But then Donald Trump won the 2024 presidential election in the United States. He threatened tariffs. He imposed tariffs. He talked about making Canada the 51st state. He said that the U.S. didn't need anything from Canada, and that Justin Trudeau resigned.
I intend to resign as party leader, as prime minister.
And all of this triggered a new campaign called Elbows Up, an anti-American campaign that resulted in Pierre Poilievre losing his 20-point-plus lead in the polls and Mark Carney being sworn in as prime minister and winning the 2025 election, resulting in the Liberals getting a fourth term, something that was seen as almost non-existent as a possibility only a few months prior.
People in Ontario and Quebec were so stupid as to elect Mark Carney as the Prime Minister of Canada. They elected him Prime Minister, and at that point, everybody in Alberta said, well, there's no hope. What are we going to do?
I think that was the final straw that broke the camel's back. I think a lot of us were, seeing all the problems and were frustrated. And then when we saw that Pierre was leading in the polls, and then all of a sudden we get Carney and people, orange man bad down in the United States, and everybody gets their elbows up and they vote for somebody who basically had no policy. I think that was the final straw for a number of Albertans, including myself.
I've never seen engagement like this before with people on the ground.
Part 4, the case for staying in Canada. As we saw, there are several Albertans who now believe that Alberta would be better off as its own country. But there are also many who do not believe that to be the case. And these people oppose Alberta independence. Several arguments have been made against independence, as well as criticisms of the promises made by independence activists about the conditions that an independent Alberta would actually bring. One of the people concerned by the economic impacts of Alberta independence is Trevor Tombe. He is a professor of economics at the University of Calgary. Tombe argues that independence would come at a substantial cost due to, among other things, something called non-tariff trade costs, which are an economic friction that can arise when goods cross new borders, even when there are no formal tariffs in place.
So interprovincial trade costs, it's important to remember, are not like international costs in the form of tariffs, taxes, things like that. It's really just about regulations being different in one jurisdiction compared to another. And that makes it costly for businesses to operate across borders or to buy and sell goods and services, or for individuals to move because the rules are different. You have to comply with them. They might mean you design your product a little bit differently. You have a couple more staff to do compliance work, things like that. And Alberta, as a separate jurisdiction, would naturally have more regulatory differences between it and other provinces in Canada, for the simple fact that any kind of federal area of jurisdiction would become provincial, and that would create differences. And it's really hard to know how much those what are called non-tariff barriers would add up to. But we know from Brexit and a great deal of research over the past decade and their experience there that non-tariff barriers between the UK and the EU rose by somewhere between 3 to 8%. And in the Alberta context, if we were to say have a 5% increase in interprovincial trade costs, the productivity effect of that is pretty big. It would shrink Alberta's economy by about 4%, which adds up to about $20 billion in foregone economic activity, or $4,000 per person. So trade costs detract from economic growth. They detract from the income that we earn, and they tend to also increase prices as well.
Tombe has also warned that a growing independence campaign could create economic and political uncertainty and translate into economic damage for Alberta. He notes that Quebec was once so economically prosperous that it contributed to equalization, but that when the Quebec separatist movement gained momentum, uncertainty led many businesses to move their operations to Ontario, and now Quebec is a receiver of equalization rather than a contributor. And Tombe believes that rising separatism in Alberta, as well as Quebec, could put 2 million jobs at risk. Nancy Southern, the chief executive of ATCO, a Calgary-based engineering, logistics, and energy holding company, meanwhile said conversations around Alberta separatism were already hurting the investment climate.
Roughly 300,000 Albertans are employed because of exports to other provinces. So interprovincial trade is not just a source of growth, but a source of job creation. And you can add to that international exports, also something where the nature of trading relationships abroad would be called into question following separation. And there's about 900,000 Alberta jobs dependent on exports overall. And uncertainty itself is a potential source of slowdown in job creation in sectors exposed to changes in the trading relationship.
Tombe has also expressed skepticism about the promises made by the Alberta Prosperity Project and other pro-independence activists, saying that their numbers do not add up. He says that once you eliminate major taxes like the income tax and the sales tax, you do not have enough revenue to cover all of the things that separatists say an independent Alberta would be able to afford. And he also noted that an independent Alberta would have to take a share of the federal debt, and Canada's federal debt currently sits at over $1 trillion. Now, I should note that the Alberta Prosperity Project did respond to Tombe's claims, accusing him of misreading and misunderstanding their numbers. But of all the people in Alberta, the man who is the most vocal opponent to Alberta independence is Thomas Lukaszuk, a former progressive conservative politician and deputy premier of the province. In response to the growing independence movement, Lukaszuk decided to spearhead his own citizen initiative project called the Forever Canadian Campaign. His campaign sought to have Alberta's united conservative government declare that staying in Canada is its official policy. And Lukaszuk's Forever Canadian Campaign received over 400,000 valid signatures from people across Alberta who want to stay in Canada.
My family as refugees came to Canada when I was a young teenager, but I came to Canada. I'm a Canadian. We sought to move to Canada, not to Alberta. Frankly, my parents probably didn't even know that Alberta exists. We were going to Canada. I pride myself in my Canadian passport, and I am, diehard Canadian, and I cannot even imagine not being Canadian, and this presumption that I would be able to keep my Canadian citizenship and attain a new one in Alberta is just that. It's a presumption. Plus, I don't want Alberta citizenship. I am a Canadian. That's what I choose to be. That's what by far majority of Canadians choose to be.
Lukaszuk explained to me that he sees several major issues with Alberta independence. For a start, he argues that the process of separation would be far more complicated than what independence activists say it would be.
The whole idea of Alberta separating from Canada is just not that simple. This is not a simple divorce where you say, honey, I don't want to be with you anymore. I'm going my separate ways. There are actual constitutional procedures that this province would have to go through, which are very complicated, would take not years, but decades to go through. And then there are some serious obstacles.
Lukaszuk also noted that an independent Alberta would be a landlocked country because Alberta does not have any coastline with oceans, and that this would bring serious challenges for a potential independent Alberta. Challenges much worse than what it currently faces as a province within Canada, a country that has access to ocean coastlines.
If Alberta is having a hard time running pipelines through British Columbia and through Quebec, today, being part of Canada, imagine what would it be like trying to run a pipeline through British Columbia when Alberta is a separate country? I think that's a very logical question to ask. I imagine it would be much harder.
And Lukaszuk also raised concerns regarding the Indigenous treaties and Indigenous opposition to Alberta independence. In December 2025, a judge had found that the independence referendum question put forward by the Alberta Prosperity Project was unconstitutional. However, the law was changed by the province to allow them to go ahead anyways with their petition signing process.
I don't know how they propose to resolve the issue of First Nation treaties, which are non-negotiable. The First Nations already came out and said, we want nothing to do with this.
But while Lukaszuk strongly opposes Alberta independence, he did tell me he agrees that the current status quo of the relationship between Alberta and Ottawa is flawed, is wrong, and needs to change, but that the solution is not independence.
Are there issues between Alberta and other provinces and Ottawa? Certainly. Much like other provinces have issues with other provinces in Ottawa, but we have processes in place to solve those issues. My Forever Canadian movement is not a status quo movement by any standard of the imagination, but there are no compelling reasons for Alberta to separate from Canada.
There is also concern about how the United States would respond to an independent Alberta and whether the U.S. would seek to make Alberta the 51st state. Jeff Rath and other Alberta separatists have had meetings with the Trump administration, a move that has generated significant controversy.
The word treasonous has been used, and I don't think it's a wrong word.
Rath told me that Alberta becoming the 51st state is off the table, and that the U.S. administration is not interested in this.
In these meetings, the senior people in the State Department we were meeting with are very clear on the fact that Alberta will never become a U.S. state. So we're more landlocked within Canada than we would be outside of Canada, is what everybody needs to internalize. I have won more treaty rights cases than any other lawyer in Canada. I'm confident in saying that. I know the Alberta treaties and the oral promises in and around those treaties backwards and forwards. I, in fact, won a case at the Supreme Court of Canada that said not that the oral promises were an interpretive aid to the treaties, but that the oral promises themselves form part of the treaties. I would not be involved in this if I thought for 1 second that Alberta independence wouldn't enhance treaty rights in the province and that treaty rights wouldn't have greater respect and greater protection in a free and independent Alberta than they do now.
Alberta leaving Canada would also be tragic for the rest of the country, amidst Alberta accounting for approximately 18% of Canada's real GDP growth. And that is why some believe that if Alberta independence were to happen, it could break Canada.
Part 5, why this will change Canada forever. Before we get to why this campaign will, and arguably already has, changed both Alberta and Canada forever, let's re-summarize what we have seen so far. Many in Alberta feel that the province has been mistreated by the federal government. Some of those people therefore believe that Alberta needs to separate from Canada to keep money that currently goes to Ottawa for things like equalization and to get rid of political underrepresentation and to make Alberta a more conservative place to live, given that an independent Alberta would likely be a very conservative country. But opponents of independence, while often do agree that the current situation is problematic, do not believe independence is a solution, and on the contrary, believe independence would only make things worse. They say that the growing independence movement would create economic uncertainty, would make Alberta poorer if it left Canada, and that we have to take into consideration the rights of Indigenous peoples. And of course, they say that they are proud to be Canadian and wouldn't want to give away their Canadian citizenship.
There is, however, one big challenge ahead, and that is that a judge has granted a month-long stay preventing Alberta's chief electoral officer from certifying the results of the petition to force a referendum. This follows a legal application from First Nations group who believe that the petition process threatens their treaty rights. This is a roadblock that could trigger even more roadblocks, but the movement will not go away. There is no way that this movement, whether you support it or not, would go away because a judge said so. As for the likelihood of separation actually happening, well, the polls currently show that most Albertans want to stay in Canada, but it's not overwhelming the way that some say it is, because some polls show that 41% of Albertans want separatism, and this is before a referendum campaign has even begun. And during my time in Alberta, I met two types of people that could complicate the situation. The first are what I call closet separatists. These are people who present themselves as Federalist to the public, to their friends, their colleagues,
but deep down, they want independence and will vote accordingly. And who knows what these people are telling pollsters. And second, I met people who are not independence supporters, but I plan on voting yes in the referendum because they hope the result will be tight so that it sends Ottawa a message. But the thing is that if you have 10% of the province that plans on doing that on top of the 41% who support independence, then, well, you could end up in a scenario where the yes side wins. And that is why Alberta Premier Danielle Smith told me in a September 2025 interview that Mark Carney and the political class and media class need to take this seriously because it is a serious issue.
You know, emotions can get very high and surprises can happen. The 1995 Quebec referendum, it almost ended up going the other way. The thing was split between the yes and no side by 1 percentage point. The Remain campaign in Britain, they ended up losing too. The no side ended up having it. So I always think it's very unpredictable when those kinds of questions are put to the people. That said, I support the citizen-initiated referendum process. Hope that Prime Minister Carney is watching that as well. I've told him to take it seriously. I said, your predecessor created this movement, but he's the one who can take the air out of it. All he has to do is take our concerns seriously, start exiting provincial jurisdiction, stop trying to direct things from the center, and allow us to develop our economy. And I think that you'll see very quickly that Albertans will just get down to work.
Now, I will note that Alberta Premier Danielle Smith is not a separatist. She's a federalist, but she said she supports the citizen initiative process. Regardless of what happens, Alberta has changed and Canada has changed forever. The old days of the Alberta-Ottawa relationship are over, and we are now in a new era where separatism is something that is on the table, something that is serious, and that will continue to be in the news, in the spotlight, and in the political arena of Alberta for years to come, just like it has been in Quebec for decades and decades. There are a lot of things that will happen in Alberta and Canada over the coming months, years, and decades. And that is why, in midst of all of this, Canada has been changed forever, whether we like it or not. My name is Cantin-Nantel. I hope that you enjoyed this documentary. Thank you for watching, and God bless.